Hey everybody, here we go with some sleep stuff. Let's take a look at the basic things happening in the brain and even behaviorally while we sleep. And this is all going to come down to mostly differences that we need to see in overall brain functions to start with. So let's look here on the left of the document that I have pulled up for you, and we're going to see a bunch of different brain waves at different stages of sleep. Now, when we're talking about brain waves, here's our reminder that in sleep studies that got information like we're looking at, the brain tool that they're using to get these measurements is called an EEG. We learned about that in a previous video. Quick recap: an EEG, an electroencephalograph recorder, has the job of measuring sort of the electrical echoes that are coming from inside the skull. So when somebody's hooked up to an EEG, like if they're part of a sleep study, like would give us data like this, imagine that person lying down and having those white round electrodes placed around their scalp and under their eyes, on their cheeks. So those electrodes are able to pick up on things like muscle tension in the face, but more importantly for us, the electrical echoes, like I said, of general regions of the brain, excuse me, um, where brain activity might be happening. So think of it like this: the fMRI and PET scan can more closer pinpoint the activity in the brain. And the EEG is giving us kind of regional activity. So, a quick analogy just to compare and contrast these different brain tools a bit. If you think of it like an orchestra that we're listening to, um, we've got all kinds of instruments in an orchestra, right? This is comparing the different brain tools in a cheesy dad metaphor, sorry. Um, you've got, cellos and violins and percussion instruments. You've got trumpets and trombones even. This is a huge orchestra. The PET scan would, no, let me back up. The fMRI would allow us, if we're analyzing the orchestra of the brain, the fMRI would allow us to know if the brass section is playing right now or not. Okay, or is it the string section? Is it low end strings? Is it the bass section? That's an fMRI. It gives us a kind of localized idea of what part of the orchestra is playing. Is it the brass section in general? Is it the low string section in general? That's the fMRI. If you use a PET scan, that's going to pinpoint even more, because the PET scan isn't just measuring general blood flow like the fMRI. The PET scan can measure glucose consumption in a more localized area. So with our orchestra analogy, the PET scan could help us detect, oh no, that's definitely the trumpets. That's the trumpets that are playing over there in the orchestra for sure. Okay, where the fMRI was like, it's the brass section, trumpets, trombones, what have you. The PET scan can be like, trumpet section for sure. A more specific part of the orchestra can be identified. The orchestra here being the brain, and the instruments of the orchestra being like the neurons of the brain. Hopefully this cheesy analogy is making sense for you. So now let's look at the EEG. The EEG is more of a regional detector of brain activity. So if we use our orchestra analogy with the EEG is even more big picture than the fMRI, right? So we'll work backwards again. The PET scan could say, that's the trumpet section, definitely playing. The fMRI is going to pull back a little bit more, and the fMRI can say, I don't know if it's trumpets or trombones, but it's definitely the brass section. Well, the EEG is going to pull back even more and be like, all right, this general side of the orchestra is playing right now. We're not sure if it's trumpets or trombones or French horns or baritones, but like this section of the orchestra is definitely playing. That's what the EEG is looking for, okay? You can let me know in some other way if that orchestra analogy doesn't make any sense to you, but we're looking at EEG readings, general regional activity. This gives us big picture ideas of whether a general part of the brain is very active or not, okay? If neurons are firing a lot or not, generally speaking. Now let's get into the kinds of waves that we can detect from an EEG. We got a person laying down with those electrodes all over their head, picking up the electrical echoes that are left from neurons firing. So as that person's laying down with the EEGs on and neurons are all over the brain, those electrodes are picking up sort of the sounds of those signals, to put it simply. And those electrodes have wires that run to a machine. That machine's got a set of needles on it that are running over a sheet of paper. You've probably seen this in movies and stuff, right? Where the paper is feeding out of the machine and the needle is going crazy on the paper, making the waves that you see here on the left. Now, let's look at those waves. We need to understand some general truths about EEG waves. Here's the first thing. These waves show frequency of neuronal firing, and they show amplitude, frequency and amplitude. You'll see those words in just a second. The frequency of brain activity is represented on these waves horizontally. Let's think of it like this. Follow my cursor here. So when we see, like in this little section of brainwave here, see how there's a bunch of waves compacted together? Like you could imagine the line on the EEG machine was going crazy, making these very fast, making these lines very quickly. They're very compact, okay? When you have a bunch of little lines close together like this horizontally, we say those are high frequency waves. The needle on the machine is making a new line very frequently. That's representing a bunch of neuronal firing. So in this part of the brain, the neurons are firing a bunch, and the EEG is picking up on that great activity. All right, let's go down here to the larger waves. We're still talking frequency of brain waves. Okay, this brain wave down here, we can see horizontally that the waves are more spread out. Okay, ignore the height of the waves for a second. We're just looking horizontally. See how there's a lot of space between the waves? We can imagine the needle on the EEG was moving pretty slowly to make this wave. If we look at the same section, right? Look at this section horizontally compared to this section up here, and we can see that these waves down here are of a low frequency. The needle is not making a new wave very often compared to up here. That needle's gone pretty crazy, okay? That's frequency of brain waves. Amplitude we can think of as measuring the height of these brain waves. So up here we have the very active brain showing high frequency brain activity and low amplitude waves. That means the waves are very short. Okay, now we're looking vertically. Look at the short little compact waves. These are low amplitude but high frequency waves. Whereas down here, we're seeing high amplitude. We've got giant peaks and low valleys like mountain ranges here. That's high amplitude, but low frequency waves. And that represents a very inactive brain, as we will see as we continue our discussion, okay? So there's EEG waves in a nutshell. Now let's get to the different sleep stages. This is obviously broken down into the 5 basic sleep stages that exist: stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then REM stage, which stands for rapid eye movement. We'll get to that in a little bit. So let's start with what we see here from the Um, wakefulness, period. Not a stage of sleep, certainly. But when a person's awake, we have, um, sort of desynchronized or inconsistent brain waves happening, but they're very high frequency and low amplitude. This is showing an awake, alert brain that is actively thinking about something. Okay? So don't be confused by this. If you see brain waves ever and they're short, little compact waves like this, that represents an actively thinking brain, a brain that has a lot of neurons firing at any given time. Right now, as you're watching this video, hopefully you're thinking about stuff, you're taking notes, and you ought to be um, creating beta waves from your brain. If you were hooked up to an EEG and you're actively thinking about what I'm talking about, you'd be producing beta waves. Hopefully, when you're driving, you're paying attention to the road and you would be creating beta activity from your brain. Okay? Now, when you close your eyes and start to relax, we're talking about going to sleep, of course, you would start to create pretty immediately alpha waves. Alpha waves start to look a little bit like this. Look at how this next set of waves here, it says stage one, but even before stage one, even before you're technically asleep, you start to create alpha waves where these brain waves start to spread out a little bit. Look how the frequency changes. The brain waves spread out, showing that fewer neurons are firing, or neurons are firing a little less often, a little less frequently. Okay? We start to see these changes in brain waves even before the person's asleep, and certainly before the person thinks they're sleeping. If you get to stage one and you're hooked up to an EEG so the researchers can see that you're in stage one, they'll wake you up and be like, okay, so how did that sleep feel? You're going to be like, what sleep? I didn't go to sleep yet. Because stage one is the lightest sleep there is. And of course, we don't realize that we've gotten into it because sleep is an altered state of consciousness. As we'll see, it's not unconsciousness, but it's an altered state of consciousness. So you'll get into stage one of sleep, not even realizing you are asleep. The scariest part of that is, right now, if you just take a second, just kind of close your eyes for a second and take a couple of deep breaths. Ready? In through the nose and out through the mouth. Start to relax a little. In through the nose. Sorry, that was very super creepy watching me do deep breathing. Hopefully your eyes were closed. You didn't have to see that creepiness. But what I'm telling you is right there, you started emitting alpha waves from your brain. If an EEG was measuring your brain right there, you would have been creating alpha waves. You weren't asleep yet, but by slowing down your breathing, you calmed down your brain and started producing alpha waves. If you're driving, remember how we said beta waves? If you're driving and paying attention to the road and you're at a new place trying to figure out where you're going, afraid of being lost, you're going to be producing beta waves, a very active type of brain wave. But if you're driving someplace that you're very familiar with, maybe your mind kind of goes off, wanders a little bit. Maybe you're very comfortable driving home from school, the route that you always go. If you've driven for a while, I'm sure you've had that time, that moment when you're like, oh crap, did I just run a red light? Because I totally wasn't paying attention to what I've been doing as I'm driving. That's scary, right? Well, you might not be technically sleeping while you're driving, but you were probably emitting alpha waves, a little bit relaxed brain waves that are close to getting us into stage one of sleep. Super scary to think that when we zone out like that, we get in that sort of hypnotic driving state, it's almost like stage one of sleep. It's getting us there. You should be very aware of that sort of thing and be very careful because it can be dangerous to drive with. Now, the the good news is, we don't want to rely on this too much, but the good news is when you're emitting alpha waves, you're certainly not in any kind of deep sleep. So it's going to be easy to snap out of that little trance that you're in as you're driving. If, a little kid runs across the road on their scooter, like, you're not going to sleep right through that and run the kid over, I hope. Anything that happens in your environment is going to be easy to snap you out of that hypnotic state and, help you go back to beta activity as you're driving. But this is leading us in to how these brain waves are changing as we're starting to go into deeper sleep. Okay, so stage 1 of sleep is the first stage, and we start to produce what's called theta waves. So let me highlight that over here for our notes. Theta waves, very light sleep, as we said, very easy to wake up from stage 1. We're not even going to realize that we're sleeping. We're certainly not having any kind of, detailed dream, because the brain has just started to relax a bit, and the body as well. Okay, so here's our first step in realizing from awake to stage 1, the body and brain are slowing down and relaxing. Neurons aren't firing as much in the brain as they were when we were awake, but also think about our parasympathetic activity. Our heart rate starts to slow down by the time we get into stage 1. Our breathing slows down. Our blood pressure drops. Body temperature drops a little bit. Maybe this is why they call it falling to sleep, because so many of our bodily activities fall, they drop, they calm down. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, try to slow down your breathing, because that will slow down your heart rate and lower your blood pressure and hopefully help you go to sleep. Certainly, if you're stressed out, if you're thinking about something that's getting the adrenaline to surge, then that's not going to help you go to sleep, right? Epinephrine is the stress hormone, one of them anyway, and it's going to keep us from sleeping, going to sleep, or sleeping well. So that's stage 1. Stage 2, this is going to happen even more, where the body and the brain relax. In stage 2, our bodily activities continue to drop, to slow down. The brain becomes more relaxed, right? We can see, look at these brain waves compared to stage 1, and certainly to the wakefulness stage. In stage 2, we see, look over here, these brain waves are starting to spread out. So we have less frequency of neuronal firing in the brain in stage 2. And look here, we have our very first signs of high amplitude waves. This is called a K complex. And it's the very first sign of a little bit of deep sleep. When you see these giant waves like this, the high amplitude, low frequency waves, those are the very first signs of deep sleep. Call them K complexes in stage 2. This is not a deep sleep yet. And by the way, we've only been asleep for a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes before we get to stage 2. And already our brain is attacking us with a little bit of deep sleep, stage 2. But it's just a little burst of deep sleep. Basically, this is a sign, I mentioned it over here, of stimulus suppression. So you're sleeping in stage 2, your body has relaxed down to stage 2, and maybe there's noises in your environment. There's a dog barking in the neighborhood, or TV on in another room, and something loud, an explosion happens in a movie. This is a sign of your brain going, ignore it, let's go to sleep, let's stay asleep, let's go deeper. Ignore that sound in the environment. That's what this K complex could be a sign of, a quick little burst of deep sleep and stimulus suppression, suppressing stimuli from the environment, helping the body stay relaxed, okay? But that's not all of stage 2, because look over here. Look at this little burst. We've got low amplitude and high frequency waves right here. Look how dark those lines get. This is called a sleep spindle. So stage 2 has brain waves that are combined. Sleep spindles with K complexes. Sleep spindles, as you can see over here in our notes, are little brief bursts of brain activity. And the K complex is a little quick burst of deep sleep. So stage 2 brain waves are made up of sleep spindles, brain activity, like the brain isn't totally ready to be into deep sleep, but also signs of deep sleep as well, as the brain and the body are falling into deeper sleep. So from awake to stage 1 to stage 2, we've continued to see brain relaxation, fewer neurons firing, but not completely. They're not completely offline. We've still got these sleep spindles happening, but every step of the way, heart rate slows down in stage 2 even more. Breathing slows down even more. Blood pressure drops even more. Muscles relax even more. And that continues into stage 3. So now we've been sleeping for maybe, pardon me, a half hour or so. We get into stage 3. And again, even more so, heart rate slows down, blood pressure drops, body temperature drops, muscles relax, and look how inactive the brain becomes. In stage 3, look at these spread out waves, very low frequency, especially over here on this side. Look how spread out these waves are and how high amplitude they are. This is a pretty relaxed brain. In stage 3, we're getting to a point where excuse me, somebody could be talking to us in our environment and we've completely tuned them out. We're not just suppressing stimuli in the environment once in a while. This is a much deeper sleep. In stage 3, we've got what are called delta waves. Delta waves. That's when we have these more consistent, big, spread out waves, delta waves. Ready for Mr. Ryder cheesy mnemonic? Delta waves represent deep sleep. Delta waves represent deep sleep. Our muscles are very relaxed. Our brain is almost turned off. Heart rate very slow. Blood pressure, body temperature very low. This is deep sleep. And we can see this even more in stage 4. Stage 4 of sleep, folks, is the deepest stage of sleep there is. Not REM. Stage 4 is the deepest sleep stage of all the stages. Look at these brain waves. Stage 4, we've got very low frequency. Look at all the space, even in the same sections here. Just compare sections. Look at the low frequency brain waves here compared to the frequency here, which was pretty low itself. And compared to all these stages up here, like, man, stage 4, look up here when we were awake, how active the brain was. Down here, stage 4, the brain is almost turned off. Neurons are hardly firing at all in comparison in stage 4. This is creepy to say, but stage 4 is the closest to being dead that hopefully we'll get to be all night. Okay, the body and brain are almost shut off. Okay, especially from environmental stimuli. We've got almost all delta waves in stage 4. Now, since we know stage 4 is the deepest of all the stages, hopefully it will make sense that this is where our most extreme sleep disorders happen, like sleepwalking, or what we call technically somnambulism. Ambulism means walking. If you ambulate around, you're walking. Som or somna, that prefix means sleeping. Okay, so somnambulism is a sleep disorder called, it's sleepwalking. This happens in stage 4, folks, sleepwalking. And I want you to think about why that should make sense. Because if you've ever seen a sleepwalker, it's not like it is in the movies where they're like Frankenstein, like, eyes closed, arms out, walking around. A sleepwalker will have their eyes open. They'll be walking around, doing stuff, and you'll think they're awake. A friend of mine had a mom who actually used to get up in the middle of the night and make sandwiches for herself. It's fun to say sandwiches. She'd get up, make like a ham and cheese sandwich at 1:30 in the morning. My friend's up, playing video games or whatever. Mom, what's up? Mom would respond to him. Nothing, just like mumbling stuff, right? She goes to the kitchen, she's making a sandwich. She leaves the mayonnaise out, dirty knife on the counter, takes a bite or two of the sandwich, goes back to bed, leaves a plate on the counter, 2 bites out of a sandwich, knife, mayonnaise, My friend doesn't realize that's all there. He ends up going to bed, and the next morning he's woken up with his mom flipping out. Who the heck's making sandwiches and not cleaning up after themselves? Blah, blah. My friend comes out rubbing his eye. Mom, what are you yelling for? If you pick up after yourself, I wouldn't have to yell, blah, blah. He goes, Mom, you did that. I saw you make yourself a sandwich in the middle of the night. I didn't know it was left out, but like you did that. I just thought you were hungry. No, I did not. I'd know if I made myself a sandwich in the middle of the night. Mom, I know you did. She could not understand how this would happen until finally my friend recorded her. He videotaped her in the middle of the night for like a week straight. Most nights it didn't happen, but once in a while, yeah, he finally caught her getting up, walking to the kitchen, rooting around in the refrigerator, and he played it back for her the next day. And she starts crying. I'm so sorry I yelled at you. I had no idea. She had no conscious idea that she was up, walking around in the middle of the night, making sandwiches, eating sandwiches, talking to her son. She wasn't making a lot of sense in her conversations, but she was responding to him. Now think about what's happening there. She was in stage 4 of sleep. Her brain is relatively shut off, right? Calm, relaxed. But for some reason, her body wasn't as relaxed as it should have been. Maybe sleepwalking happens most when we're stressed out. By the way, it doesn't happen that much with adults. It happens most with children, and they tend to grow out of it. Excuse me. But the body is supposed to be very relaxed in stage 4. We don't usually do a lot of tossing and turning in stage 4 because the body's so relaxed. Her body wasn't as relaxed as it should have been, but her brain was. So she was able to get up out of bed, walk around, eyes opened. Think about it. She's navigating around her house, which she's familiar with. So she doesn't have to think a bunch about where to go, what to do. Her relatively inactive brain, pardon me, is taking information in through the eyes. She walks to the fridge. She's able to grab the ham, the cheese, the mayonnaise. She gets a knife from the silverware drawer. These are things that she does typically in her day. She doesn't have to think deeply about these things. So even with a relatively inactive brain, she's able to do this. And like I said, information's coming in through the eyes. She sees what she's doing, but she's not consciously interpreting that she's doing it. She's in an altered state of consciousness, stage 4. Her son talks to her. Mom, what are you doing? Just not, I don't know, with the... She's hearing his voice. She's responding to him. She's not making a lot of sense because her brain's not actively putting thoughts together really well. Like if she were fully awake with a very active brain, it should sort of make sense that this sort of thing can happen in stage 4, sleepwalking. Okay? A similar but different thing would be night terrors. Night terrors happen in stage 4, not nightmares. Nightmares are very vivid, scary, horrible dreams. We don't have very vivid dreams in stage 4. That's coming in a little bit in something I'll explain. Night terrors are not nightmares. Night terrors are when a person can have their eyes open, they'll be screaming, thrashing around, maybe in bed, maybe up running around, punching things, what have you. But the EEG shows very clearly that they're in stage 4 of sleep. An extreme example of this. There's a story of a guy who was married. He's sleeping in the same bed with his wife, go figure. And the wife wakes up in the middle of the night to her husband being over top of her, like hands on her shoulders, basically. And his eyes are wide open and he's screaming in her face. Ah! Please don't screenshot whatever horribleness that was. But his eyes are open. He's screaming in his wife's face and he's shaking her. Ah! And she wakes up, freaks out, thinks that her husband's trying to murder her, right? So she fights him, tosses him off of her, runs to the bathroom, locks the door because she thinks he's trying to murder her. she hears him in the bedroom continuing this violence. He's knocking stuff over. He's apparently punching walls, knocking down lamps. And like after a couple of minutes, everything quiets down. Well, she stays in the bathroom, door locked, thinking, is he messing with me? Is he coming to get me? Like, what's going on? Right? Eventually, she unlocks the bathroom door, goes out to the kitchen, grabs a butcher knife, comes back to the bedroom, like peeks around the corner, sees him on the bed just laying there. The room is trash. Sheets are off the bed, lamps are broken, there's a hole in the wall. She doesn't know what is going on. She goes over and like kicks him, tries to wake him up. And it's hard to wake him up because at this, like he's still in deep sleep. So, hey, hey, and she's holding the knife to him and he wakes up. What's the matter? What are you doing? Whoa. He wakes up to see his wife with a knife. The room is trashed. He has no idea what's happening. He says, what are you doing? What are you trying to kill me? She goes, me? What are you doing? You tried to kill me. You did this. No, I didn't do this. I've been sleeping. What happened in this room? He has no idea what's happened. His eyes were open. He was screaming, but he's not waking up because he was in stage 4 of sleep. He suffered a night terror. You take this guy to a sleep lab, hook him up to an EEG, you can see him doing this stuff in the lab room, knocking stuff down, thrashing about, screaming, eyes open. And the EEG clearly shows stage 4 delta wave activity. This guy's got information coming in through the eyes, but he's not conscious of it. He's not aware of what he's doing, why he's doing it. That's a night terror. Very different from a nightmare. Okay? Sleep apnea is a sleep disorder where a person stops breathing as they're sleeping. And this happens in stage 4 too, as the body's very relaxed, as the breathing is very slow, and we're out of it, as close to being dead as hopefully we get all night long. Sleep apnea is when breathing stops. There's, to put it simply, a flap in the windpipe that goes closed on a person, that if it closes the whole way, keeps them from breathing. Now, if it closes part way, the person just snores, right? When that flap closes in our windpipe part way, we get a little bit of a snore. A person with sleep apnea, that flap, I don't know the scientific name for the flap, whatever, we don't need to know for the AP test, we'll just call it windpipe flap. Why not? Good name for a band, by the way. We are a windpipe flap. But that windpipe flap, if it closes like most of the way or all of the way, that's going to suffocate the person temporarily. They have a momentary, lack of ability to breathe. So it might sound something like this. If you know anybody who suffers from sleep apnea, they might snore very loudly. And once in a while, their snoring might sound like this. This is going to sound disgusting. I apologize. Hopefully I don't cough a bunch trying to imitate snoring. It's going to sound like this. Listen for the stopping of breathing. Ready? It's gross, right? Doesn't feel good either. Sorry. That's what sleep apnea might sound like. The person stops breathing through no fault of their own. That flap goes closed in their windpipe and keeps them from breathing. And when that happens, they wake up. Now, they probably don't realize they wake up. But if you suffer from sleep apnea, you go to a sleep lab, you're hooked up to this EEG, and they will see when you're in stage 4 and they hear you snoring, like the brain's defense is, oh my God, we're suffocating. Wake up. You will clearly see on the EEG numerous times throughout the night. The brain waves go from stage 4 to wakefulness for like a blip, for a second or so. And then the person goes back down into their deep sleep. They go back to stage 4 to try to get rest. And they start snoring. And when they stop breathing, the brain wakes up because the brain doesn't want this person dying. So wake up, don't die, breathe. And this can happen numerous times throughout a night where the person's waking up for a second or so, but they don't realize they're waking up. They're not conscious of waking up because they're coming from such a deep sleep and going back into the deep sleep. They could be waking up dozens or even hundreds of times throughout the night. So sleep apnea not only runs the risk of making a person die. That has happened in some cases where a person dies because they stop breathing. Even if they don't die from it, they're not getting restful sleep because they're waking up so many times in the middle of the night because the brain is trying to keep them alive. Okay. Stage 4, in a nutshell: sleep disorders. Bedwetting, again, likely to happen in childhood. A person usually grows out of it. But if it does happen, most likely to happen in stage 4, when the body is super relaxed and the brain is not consciously interpreting things like it usually does throughout the day. So if a person has the urge to go to the bathroom, they might not consciously realize it in this deep sleep. The muscles are relaxed, including the muscles in and around the bladder, and bedwetting can happen. That's stage 4, okay? That's from wakefulness down to stage 4, everybody. Now, we're not done, but I'm going to cut this video off right now and start another one to finish our sleep stages, because the most important stuff might be coming up. So make sure you tune back in to the next section here. I'll try not to snort and sound so disgusting in the next recording.